Hi, Yusuf here, and here is a very quick working knowledge of muscle, because there's often misconceptions about how it works. So thought I would go over what it is, what's it made of, what happens when it contracts and stretches, and what is really meant by tone. So what is muscle? Here is a picture of me as an example, and there are actually three types of muscle. So we're interested in skeletal muscle here. The other types are smooth muscle, like the small intestine, and cardiac muscle, like in the heart. So the purpose of skeletal muscle is to connect two moving parts of the skeleton together so that you can move them under your conscious or unconscious control. And this is what it's made of. So here is a muscle belly, which is a bundle of smaller fibers known as fasciculi. The fasciculi are made up of even smaller fibers called myofibrils, and then these are made up of sarcomeres, which are the basic subunits of muscle, and they're what are made up of the contractile proteins. And muscle attaches to tendons. So here you can see the quadriceps muscle in the leg. Here is the quadriceps tendon where the rectus femoris attaches to the patella. Not to get tendon confused with ligament, which is something that connects bone to bone. As you can see here from the patella ligament, confusingly, people call this the patella tendon. I should have maybe chosen a different example. There is also fascia. Fascia isn't very well understood, but ironically it could be pretty important as far as the self-management of injuries goes. But it's a connective tissue that surrounds and penetrates muscle, transmits tension and reduces friction. And if you want to get a feel for it, try this stretch, and you'll certainly get a good idea of the fascial chain that runs from the muscle up and downstream. One theory is that as fascia stiffens over time, it contributes to the formation of adhesions, which can mean pain and impaired recovery and postural issues. So, contraction of a muscle. What you're looking at here are the filaments, which are the microscopic fibers within the myofibril that we discussed before, and they're made up of actin and myosin filaments. The theory is that they slide over each other, and this happens across the length of the muscle, which then causes a general shortening of the fiber, and because the muscle attaches to two bones, then the shortening of the fiber brings them together. This process is influenced by conscious control and unconscious, with sort of postural and balance from the cerebellum, and that's mediated by a cellular store of calcium called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So an action potential or an electrical impulse is sent via efferent motor neurons down the spinal cord and onto an alpha neuron at the muscle fiber. That causes a release of calcium to dislodge an inhibitory protein in the muscle fibers called troponin C, which allows cross-bridging of the actin and myosin filaments. So there is also an efferent pathway which is going towards the spinal cord, and that involves gamma neurons, which is relevant for when it comes to stretching, which I'll discuss in a second. Training induces a number of changes to muscle, which I'll need to cover in another video to do it full justice, but generally mechanical tension causes microtrauma to the muscle proteins, which triggers a cascade of signaling pathways that induce anabolism and protein synthesis. This then combines with neural adaptations to get you stronger and bigger as a response to training. Tone. So this annoys me a bit, but when people normally talk about tone, they might refer to this woman as being toned, and what they're really referring to is the fact that she has a high amount of muscle mass with respect to her body fat. So the word tone in itself is a pretty meaningless term in the colloquial sense, but it does have a specific meaning. So myogenic tone means the resting tension in a muscle, and neurogenic tone is the tension observed when the muscle is flexed. Now, some people, silly people, follow specific training protocols to try and influence myogenic and neurogenic tone visually, That's getting extremely bogged down, and the people who do that invariably just need to gain some mass and stop being silly. Now, stretching. If you've ever been to the doctor and they bang your knee with a hammer, they're testing for the stretch reflex. So the banging the knee of the hammer pulls on the tendon, which then causes a very brief stretch on the quadriceps muscle. So that provides an afferent signal going to the spinal cord, which reaches an interneuron, which relays to an efferent alpha neuron back to the muscle again to induce a contraction. So a quick stretch on the muscle causes a reactive contraction. Why am I telling you this? So this is why stretching causes you to resist if you were to suddenly jump into the splits. Now, it's not the physical length of the fiber that stretches. If you can get into this position, for example, the half splits on both sides, then you have the fiber length necessary to do the splits in your legs. There's no muscle running across from one leg to the other, yet we still can't do the splits, and that's because the limiting factors are actually neurological and partly mechanical from the fascia. So ways to overcome this are things that reduce this reactive tension. So there are a few mechanisms called reciprocal inhibition, which is when you flex the antagonist muscle, which causes the target muscle you're trying to stretch to relax more. There's PNF stretching, which is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, I think. And that's where you contract the muscle that you're stretching and then relax it again to just go deeper into the stretch each time. Also, you want to avoid things that, so things like cold, which will be shivering, and that's going to cause more tension, or abrupt stretching. Also, just holding the stretch for longer and breathing into it and relaxing to try and relax all of the muscles surrounding that so that the target muscle can stretch further. If you've ever had an injury, then you may have noticed heightened threat perception around the area that's been injured, and that can come from an increased density of these gamma receptors, which are the afferent receptors in the muscle that detect finer movement and stretch. So that can then cause a reactive spasm even when there's no real threat, and a sensation of pain for even the slightest movements. And that is hypersensitization. Anyway, there is a quick overview of muscle. I hope it was helpful, and post any questions you have in the comments below. Speak to you soon.